The bright red, white, and blue porch flag snapped in the breeze, a bold declaration of patriotism. But for Susan Wilkins, it was more than just a symbol. It was a testament to her late husband's service and a daily reminder of the freedom he had fought to protect. As she stepped outside that fateful morning, Susan noticed a crisp, official-looking envelope wedged in her door. Her heart sank as she read the words, "Violation Notice from Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association." Hands trembling, she unfolded the letter. "You are in violation of the community guidelines regarding acceptable porch displays. The American flag is permitted, however, any additional flags or banners are prohibited. You have 10 days to remove the offending item or face daily fines and potential legal action." Susan's knees buckled. This couldn't be happening. The flag had been a fixture on her porch for over a decade, a source of comfort and pride. How dare the HOA demand its removal? Determined to fight, she stormed into the HOA office, the letter clutched in her fist. "This is ridiculous. My husband died serving this country, and you want me to take down his flag?" The bored-looking receptionist barely glanced up. "Ma'am, I understand this is upsetting, but the rules are clear. If you don't comply, you'll be fined." "I won't do it." Susan's voice rose, drawing the attention of other residents in the lobby. "This is my constitutional right, and you have no business telling me what I can display on my own property." The receptionist sighed and pressed a button, summoning the HOA president, Margaret Wilkins, a stern-faced woman with a reputation for wielding her authority like a blunt instrument. "Mrs. Wilkins, this woman is causing a disturbance. She refuses to remove an unauthorized flag from her porch." Margaret fixed Susan with a cold stare. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If you don't comply with the violation notice, we'll have no choice but to levy fines and, if necessary, take legal action." "Legal action?" Susan scoffed. "You can't be serious. This is my home, my property, and that flag means everything to me. I'm not taking it down, and you can't make me." The tension in the room escalated as other residents gathered, some murmuring in agreement with Susan, others casting disapproving glances in her direction. Sensing the brewing confrontation, Margaret stood her ground. "I'm warning you, Mrs. Wilkins. You have 10 days to remove that flag, or will be forced to take drastic measures. This is non-negotiable." Susan glared at the HOA president, her eyes brimming with defiance and hurt. "We'll see about that." Fuming, Susan returned home, her mind racing with a mix of anger, determination, and uncertainty. The HOA's demand to remove her late husband's flag was a slap in the face, a betrayal of the very freedoms he had sworn to protect. She paced her living room, clutching the violation notice, weighing her options. Compliance was out of the question, but the threat of fines and legal action loomed ominously. Suddenly, a thought dawned on her. Wasn't there some kind of law protecting the right to display the American flag? Surely the HOA couldn't override that. Susan's fingers flew across the keyboard as she frantically searched for information. After scouring several websites, she stumbled upon the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. Her eyes widened as she read the details. This federal law explicitly prohibited HOAs from restricting the display of the American flag. A glimmer of hope ignited within her. She was not alone in this fight. The law was on her side. Emboldened, Susan marched back to the HOA office, her head held high. This time, the receptionist greeted her with a wary expression. "Mrs. Wilkins, I must insist that you remove the unauthorized flag from your porch. The HOA has made its position clear." "Actually, I'm quite familiar with the law now," Susan replied, her voice steady. "The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act states that HOAs cannot restrict the display of the American flag. You have no legal grounds to force me to take it down." The receptionist's brow furrowed, and she quickly consulted a binder on her desk. Her eyes widened as she scanned the relevant pages. I'm not sure how to proceed. Let me get the president. Margaret Wilkins strode out, her lips pressed into a thin line. Mrs. Wilkins, I'm afraid you're mistaken. Our guidelines clearly prohibit any additional flags or banners on the porch. But you're forgetting one very important thing, Susan countered, her gaze unwavering. Federal law trumps your community guidelines. I have the right to display the American flag, and you can't stop me. The HOA president's face flushed with frustration. That may be true, but we have strict aesthetic standards to uphold. Your flag is disruptive to the uniform appearance of the neighborhood. Disruptive. Susan scoffed. This is my home, and that flag represents the sacrifice of my husband. Your aesthetic standards don't override his memory or my rights as an American citizen. The confrontation drew the attention of other residents, some of whom murmured in support of Susan, while others nodded in agreement with the HOA's position. Sensing the growing tension, Margaret held up a hand. Very well, Mrs. Wilkins, we'll discuss this matter further. But I can assure you, we won't back down easily. Susan met the president's gaze, her resolve unwavering. Neither will I. The standoff between Susan and the HOA simmered in the days that followed, tension building like a thunderstorm on the horizon. Susan refused to budge, defiantly keeping her late husband's flag flying, while the HOA president, Margaret Wilkins, plotted her next move. Susan spent hours poring over legal documents, determined to fortify her position. She found solace in the support of several neighbors who shared her outrage at the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. This is such a disgrace, said her neighbor, Emily, shaking her head. They can't just trample all over your rights like that. That flag means the world to you. Exactly, Susan replied, her eyes burning with conviction. My husband gave his life for this country, and I'll be damned if I let some HOA bureaucrats tell me I can't honor his memory. Emily placed a reassuring hand on Susan's arm. Well, you know you've got my support, and I bet there are plenty of others who feel the same way. Susan mustered a grateful smile. Thanks, Emily. It means a lot to know I'm not alone in this fight. Across town, Margaret Wilkins was huddled in a private meeting with the HOA's legal counsel, her brow furrowed in concentration. So you're telling me there's no way we can force her to remove that flag? She asked, her voice laced with frustration. The lawyer shook his head. I'm afraid not. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act is quite clear on this matter. As long as the flag is properly displayed, the HOA has no legal grounds to demand its removal. Margaret's lips tightened into a thin line. Well, we can't just sit back and let her defy our community standards. There has to be something we can do. The lawyer cleared his throat. There is one option, but it's rather unorthodox. Margaret leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. I'm listening. Back at her home, Susan received an unexpected visitor, the local news reporter, camera crew in tow. Mrs. Wilkins, we've been following the story of your standoff with the HOA, the reporter said, microphone in hand. Would you be willing to share your side of the situation? Susan hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Absolutely. The American flag means everything to me, and I won't let the HOA bully me into taking it down. This is my constitutional right, and I'm prepared to fight for it. The reporter's eyes widened, and she quickly gestured to the camera. There you have it, folks. A remarkable story of one woman's battle to defend her patriotic display in the face of HOA opposition. We'll be following this developing situation closely. As the news crew packed up and departed, Susan felt a surge of both pride and trepidation. She knew the HOA wouldn't back down easily, and the stakes were only going to get higher. But she was more determined than ever to stand her ground, no matter the cost. The local news report on Susan's standoff with the HOA quickly went viral, igniting a firestorm of public debate and attention. While many rallied to her defense, citing the sanctity of her constitutional rights, others sided with the HOA, arguing for the need to maintain community standards. The phones at the Oakwood Estates HOA office were ringing off the hook as angry residents and concerned citizens from across the country bombarded the organization with calls and emails, demanding that they respect Susan's right to display the American flag. Margaret Wilkins, the HOA president, paced her office, her brow furrowed in a mixture of frustration and determination. The lawyer's unorthodox suggestion was weighing heavily on her mind, but she knew it was a risky gambit that could backfire spectacularly. "This has gotten completely out of hand," she muttered, glaring at the stack of angry messages. "We can't let one woman's stubbornness undermine our entire community's standards." Steeling her resolve, Margaret placed a call to the local police department, requesting a meeting with the chief. Meanwhile, Susan found herself the center of a whirlwind of media attention. News vans lined her street, and reporters clamored for interviews, eager to capture the drama of her defiant stand against the HOA. "I'm just trying to honor my husband's memory," Susan told one reporter, her voice wavering with emotion. "He died serving this country, and the American flag is a symbol of the freedoms he fought to protect. I won't let the HOA take that away from me." The reporter nodded solemnly, her eyes reflecting a genuine empathy. "The public is certainly rallying to your cause, Mrs. Wilkins. Many see this as a clear violation of your rights." Susan managed a weary smile. "I appreciate the support, but the truth is, I just want to be left alone. This should never have turned into a national spectacle." As the interview wrapped up, Susan retreated into her home, seeking refuge from the constant media glare. She knew the HOA wouldn't back down without a fight, and she steeled herself for whatever tactics they might employ next. Little did she know, Margaret Wilkins was hatching a plan that would push the conflict to new heights. Later that day, Susan was startled by a knock at her door. To her surprise, it was a uniformed police officer, his expression unreadable. "Mrs. Wilkins, I'm afraid I have some troubling news. The HOA has filed a formal complaint, alleging that your flag display is a safety hazard and a potential fire risk." Susan's heart sank. "What? That's ridiculous. The flag has been there for years without incident." The officer raised a hand. "I understand your frustration, ma'am, but the HOA is insisting that we investigate the matter. I'm going to have to ask you to take the flag down until the situation can be resolved." Susan stared at the officer, her mind racing. "You can't be serious. This is a clear violation of my rights. I'm not taking down that flag, and you can't make me." The officer's expression turned apologetic. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wilkins, but I've been instructed to use force if necessary. The HOA is adamant, and they've threatened legal action if I don't comply." Susan's eyes widened in disbelief. This couldn't be happening. Helplessly, she watched as the officer reached for the flag, preparing to remove it by force. Susan's heart raced as the police officer reached for the flag, his expression a mix of apology and determination. She knew in that moment that the HOA had stooped to an unthinkable tactic, using the authorities to strong-arm her into compliance. "You can't do this," she cried, stepping between the officer and the flag. "This is a clear violation of my constitutional rights. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act protects my right to fly this flag, and you have no legal grounds to remove it." The officer paused, his hand hovering in the air. "Ma'am, I understand your position, but the HOA has filed a formal complaint citing safety concerns. I'm required to investigate, and they've threatened legal action if I don't comply." Susan's eyes narrowed, her voice dripping with indignation. "Safety concerns? This flag has been up for over a decade without incident. This is nothing more than a blatant abuse of power by the HOA. You can't just ignore federal law because they're throwing a tantrum." The officer's brow furrowed, and for a moment, Susan saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Look, I don't want to escalate this situation, but I have my orders. If you refuse to remove the flag, I'll have no choice but to arrest you for obstructing an investigation." Susan's stomach churned with a mix of fear and defiance. Arrest me. You can't be serious. I'm an American citizen, exercising my constitutional rights in my own home. This is outrageous. The confrontation drew the attention of nearby neighbors, some of whom rushed to Susan's defense, while others watched with a mix of uncertainty and discomfort. What's going on here? A gruff voice called out. Susan turned to see her neighbor, a retired Marine named Jack, striding towards them. Why are you harassing this woman? The officer's expression softened slightly. Sir, I'm just following orders from the HOA. They've filed a complaint, and I have to investigate. Jack's eyes narrowed, and he stepped closer to the officer, his stance commanding. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act is federal law. You can't just trample all over this woman's rights because some HOA bureaucrats are throwing a tantrum. The officer hesitated, his resolve wavering. But the HOA is threatening legal action if I don't comply. Jack let out a derisive snort. Legal action, huh? Well, you let those HOA jackals know that if they try to take this to court, they'll have a whole lot more to worry about than just one American flag. The officer glanced between Susan and Jack, the weight of the decision clearly weighing on him. Finally, he let out a deep sigh and stepped back. All right, Mrs. Wilkins, you can keep your flag up for now. But I'd advise you to be prepared for whatever the HOA has planned next. Susan felt a surge of relief and gratitude, her eyes glistening with tears. Thank you, officer. And thank you, Jack. I couldn't have done this without your support. Jack placed a weathered hand on her shoulder, his expression softening. You're welcome, Susan. This flag means as much to me as it does to you. We're not going to let anyone take it down without a fight. As the officer departed, Susan and Jack exchanged a knowing glance, both of them bracing for the next round of the battle with the HOA. In the aftermath of the confrontation with the police, Susan found herself thrust even deeper into the media spotlight. News outlets across the country were captivated by the dramatic standoff, and her story quickly became a rallying cry for those who believed in the sanctity of individual freedoms. But while the public's support buoyed her spirits, Susan knew the HOA was far from finished. She could feel the weight of their determination pressing in, and she steeled herself for whatever tactics they might employ next. Across town, Margaret Wilkins was locked in a tense meeting with the HOA's legal counsel, their voices hushed and urgent. The police officer backed down, but that won't deter us, Margaret said, her brow furrowed in frustration. We have to find a way to get that flag down, no matter what it takes. The lawyer cleared his throat, his expression uneasy. Madam President, I must caution you. Any further attempts to forcibly remove the flag could backfire spectacularly. The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act is quite clear, and we're on shaky legal ground. Margaret's eyes narrowed. I don't care about the legalities. This is about maintaining the integrity of our community standards. We can't let one stubborn woman undermine everything we've worked to build here. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I understand your concerns, but we have to tread carefully. If we push too hard, we could end up facing a lawsuit, or worse, a public relations disaster. The optics of this situation are already quite unfavorable. Margaret's jaw tightened. Then we'll need to find a more subtle approach. She paused, her gaze hardening. One that doesn't involve the authorities this time. The lawyer's eyes widened. Madam President, you can't be suggesting. Margaret held up a hand, silencing him. I'm done playing by the rules. If Susan Wilkins won't back down, then we'll have to make her life so miserable that she has no choice but to comply. Back at her home, Susan found herself besieged by a relentless onslaught of harassment. First, it was anonymous phone calls in the middle of the night, the caller's voice taunting her to take down the flag. Then, her mailbox was vandalized, the American flag emblazoned on the side defaced with crude graffiti. Susan's heart raced with each new incident, and she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that the HOA was behind these attacks. But with no solid evidence, She was powerless to do anything but hunker down and weather the storm. One evening, as Susan was preparing dinner, a sudden crash from the front porch sent her racing outside. To her horror, she found her beloved flag in tatters, the flagpole toppled to the ground. Tears streaming down her face, Susan fell to her knees, cradling the tattered remnants of the flag. She knew, in that moment, that the HOA had crossed a line, and she was more determined than ever to fight back. Wiping her eyes, she grabbed her phone and began dialing. If the HOA wanted a war, she was going to give them one. Susan's fingers trembled as she scrolled through her contacts, searching for the number of a local attorney. The destruction of her husband's flag had been the final straw, and she was determined to take legal action against the HOA. As the phone rang, she paced her living room, her mind racing with a mix of anger, fear, and steely resolve. This had gone far beyond a simple dispute over community standards. The HOA's tactics had become outright harassment, and she wasn't going to stand for it. "Hello, this is David Larson. How can I help you today?" Susan took a deep breath, her voice laced with urgency. "Mr. Larson, my name is Susan Wilkins, and I need your help. The HOA in my community has been harassing me, and they've now gone so far as to destroy my American flag. I need to take legal action against them." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "I see. Let me get some more details about the situation. What exactly has the HOA done, and do you have any evidence to support your claims?" Susan quickly recounted the escalating conflict, from the initial violation notice to the latest act of vandalism. "I have the original violation letter, and my neighbor witnessed the police officer being called to my home. And now, my flag is destroyed. I have pictures to show the damage." Larson let out a low whistle. "This is a very serious situation, Mrs. Wilkins. The HOA's actions, if proven, could constitute harassment, vandalism, and a clear violation of your constitutional rights. I'll need to review the evidence, but I believe we have a very strong case against them." Susan felt a surge of hope, her grip on the phone tightening. "So you'll take my case? I'm ready to fight this all the way." "Absolutely," Larson replied. "The Freedom to Display the American Flag Act is federal law, and the HOA has no legal grounds to restrict your right to fly that flag. We'll file an injunction to prevent them from any further interference, and then we'll pursue damages for the destruction of your property." Susan's shoulders sagged with relief. "Thank you, Mr. Larson. I can't tell you how much this means to me. My husband gave his life for this country, and I refuse to let the HOA disrespect his memory." "I understand completely, Mrs. Wilkins," Larson said, his voice compassionate. "We'll make sure the HOA is held accountable for their actions. When can you come in to discuss the details and sign the paperwork?" "As soon as possible," Susan replied, her resolve hardening. "I want to get this ball rolling right away. The HOA has pushed me too far, and I'm not going to let them win." As Susan ended the call, a sense of cautious optimism began to take root. With the law on her side and a skilled attorney at her back, she felt a renewed determination to fight for her rights and the memory of her beloved husband. The HOA, she knew, was in for a rude awakening. This was a battle they would not win without a fight. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal maneuvering, as Susan and her attorney, David Larson, set their sights on the Oakwood Estates HOA. They filed a federal lawsuit alleging violation of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act and seeking damages for the destruction of Susan's beloved flag. Margaret Wilkins, the HOA president, found herself on the defensive, her once confident demeanor crumbling in the face of the mounting legal pressure. Larson's team presented a formidable case, with evidence of the HOA's escalating harassment tactics and clear documentation of Susan's rights under federal law. "This is an open and shut case," Larson argued before the judge, his voice ringing with conviction. "The HOA's actions constitute a flagrant disregard for the constitutional rights of my client, Mrs. Wilkins. They have willfully and maliciously interfered with her ability to display the American flag, a symbol of the very freedoms they seek to suppress. Margaret Wilkins, her composure fraying, tried to mount a defense, but the judge's withering gaze made it clear that the HOA's position was on shaky ground. Mrs. Wilkins, the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act is quite clear on this matter, the judge declared, his tone stern. I see no valid reason why the HOA should be permitted to restrict the display of the American flag on private property. Your community guidelines do not supersede federal law. The HOA president's face flushed with frustration, but she held her tongue, sensing the futility of further argument. Therefore, I am granting an immediate injunction prohibiting the Oakwood Estates HOA from any further interference with Mrs. Wilkins' right to fly the American flag on her property, the judge continued. Furthermore, I am awarding Mrs. Wilkins damages in the amount of $50,000 to compensate for the destruction of her flag and the emotional distress she has endured. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, and Susan felt a surge of triumph wash over her. After months of conflict and anguish, justice had prevailed. As she left the courthouse, Susan was greeted by a throng of reporters, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust in her direction. Mrs. Wilkins, how does it feel to have won this battle against the HOA? One reporter asked, her eyes alight with excitement. Susan paused, a bittersweet smile crossing her lips. Honestly, I wish this had never happened. All I wanted was to honor my husband's memory by flying a flag he fought to defend. The HOA's actions were a disgrace, a betrayal of the very principles he gave his life for. She took a deep breath, her gaze hardening with resolve. But I'm glad I stood my ground. This isn't just about me. It's about protecting the rights of all Americans to display the symbol of our nation's freedom. I hope this serves as a wake-up call to any HOA that tries to trample on our constitutional liberties. As the reporters continued to pepper her with questions, Susan turned and headed home, her head held high. The American flag, now proudly unfurled once more, fluttered in the breeze, a testament to her hard-won victory and a reminder that the spirit of freedom still burned brightly in her heart.